Hello everyone, welcome to LWI Remembers, a special project sponsored by LWI's Institutional Memory Project. My name is Abigail Perdue, and I'm the current president of the Legal Writing Institute, and it's my great pleasure to have with me today two legends of legal writing, Laurel Oates and Chris Rideout. Laurel was one of the co-founders of the Legal Writing Institute and also one of the organizers of the first biennial for the Legal Writing Institute. In 2025, LWI actually renamed its influential teaching award in honor of Laurel. She's also one of founders of Seattle University's Legal Writing Program, which is one of the most prestigious writing programs in the nation. She directed that program from 1982 until 2012 and still teaches in the program. She's also the co-author of 5 books: The Legal Writing Handbook, Just Research, Just Memos, Just Briefs, and Just Writing. And she's also the recipient of many well-deserved awards and accolades, among them the Burton Award for Outstanding Contributions to Legal Writing and the Marjorie Rombauer Award for Contributions to the Teaching of Legal Writing. Thank you so much, Laurel, for joining us today.
Thank you.
And we also have with us J. Chris Rideout, who's a retired professor who formerly taught at Seattle University School of Law. From 1981 to 1984, he co-directed a regional writing project funded by the National Endowment for the Humanities. And as an outgrowth of that project, he, along with Laurel, helped to co-found the Legal Writing Institute, helped to organize the first LWI Biennial, and also served as the president of the Legal Writing Institute. Later, he served as a founding editor-in-chief of the journal, Legal Writing, and he's also mentored others through his work as a mentor and facilitator with the Writers' Workshop, sponsored by LWI. In 2009, Chris received the Mary S. Lawrence Award in recognition of his countless contributions to legal writing scholarship. Thank you so much, Chris, for joining us today. It's an honor to have you both with us. I wanted to begin by asking you how the idea of a biennial for legal writing came up and who helped with the planning. What did the planning entail for this first biennial?
So at the same time, I was teaching in the English department, and I mentioned I had joined this group of people from 5 other schools, so there was a consortium of 6 of us. We applied for a federal National Endowment for the Humanities Writing Across the Curriculum grant, and we got it. So the same year, I started with Laurel at the law school part-time for part of my appointment, 1981. The consortium of 6 schools started that Writing Across the Curriculum project in the Pacific Northwest. We had conferences at different schools. Each school got money to bring in consultants, have workshops with faculty, things like that. I was doing that first at the university through the English department. The final year, we brought in a consultant to the law school, Ken Bruffy from Brooklyn College, to talk about using small groups for writing. And by the way, he and our dean talked about New York in the old days, and they hit it off really well. It never hurts when your dean gets along with these people. So that was a 3-year project. So by 1984, I had done all the things that we had promised to do in the grant. But for my part of the pie, I had $3,000 left. So I went to Laurel and said, "Do you want to have a conference?" I think I said, "Should we throw a party? We've got $3,000." And the model I had in mind was a conference I had gone to in 1978, the first year I was hired in the English department. For years, there was a conference there at the University of Wyoming called the Wyoming Conference on Freshman and Sophomore Writing. And it was a great conference. It was very informal. It was very friendly. Lots of ideas flowed, ranging from how to teach people to combine sentences, this thing that was new then, to Jacques Derrida and post-structuralism and what it means for the writing class. Everything was there. There was a barbecue. you could go to the rodeo, and you got to know people. So I suggested that to Laurel as the model for our conference. And Laurel and I went to the dean, and I'll let Laurel say what the dean told us.
He told us that it sounded like a great idea. He asked us whether we could do it for $3,000, and we said, probably not. We would need some institutional support for the upfront cost. And he said, okay, but you need to break even and pay us back at the end of the conference for anything that we've advanced to you. And by the way, if you don't, it will come out of your salary. I would like to say that my first year of teaching, I got paid $13,000 for my 9-month contract. And so both Chris and I are both physically conservative, but we were really motivated to keep costs low and not to run into debt. And I think that ethos continued throughout the early years and even today in the Legal Writing Institute. The conferences had to make money so that you could have another conference, so that you could have a newsletter, you could have a journal, you could do a survey. There were all kinds of things that the conference ended up funding, or the conferences ended up funding. So the biggest issue back then, it's kind of have to put us in this 1983 mode. There's no internet. There is no really listing anywhere of who teaches legal writing. So figuring out who to invite to this legal writing conference was a challenge. There'd been a conference the year before, and we tried to get their list with almost no luck. So we ended up creating a brochure, and Chris had helped us come up with some great speakers. And we simply mailed it to everyone we knew who taught legal writing, and to each dean and each person that had been listed as being a director of a legal writing program, inviting them to this conference. And I think our expectation was that maybe 10 people would show up. We were a little worried, but we were so excited when the registrations started coming in. And I think it's important to note that at that point in time, almost no people who were teaching legal writing had any travel money that they could use as short-term contracts or adjuncts. They simply were not given the opportunity to travel at their school's expenses. So people came who did get institutional support, but a lot of them paid their own way, which is why the model Chris had come up with for the conference worked so well. We used the University of Puget Sound facilities for which they charged us almost nothing. We used the dorms for housing. Almost everybody stayed in the dorm. 1 or 2 people stayed in a hotel. And we held things in the classrooms at the university. And we had, as our social events, we had wonderful food, but volleyball in the evenings. Jill Ransfield came and played the music. But it was a small enough conference that by the end, everybody pretty much knew everybody. And some people stayed in the lounge late into the night, eating the leftovers and drinking the wine and talking about legal writing.
About how many people came?
Just over 100, maybe 102, 103. So much to our surprise.
And how many days was the conference? Was it 1 day, 2?
It was 2, and then 2 days of conference things.
Yeah, the opening reception was the night before, and then a 2-day conference. The University of Puget Sound is a beautiful campus, all green and red Tudor brick buildings and ivy on the walls and things like that. And it really was empty during the summer. They didn't have a summer school program to speak of. So we had the campus to ourselves, and it was such a wonderful setting in a temperate climate. There was no need for air conditioning. And the dorm, it didn't matter. When big after that and had a cruise on the Puget Sound and things like that.
Oh, I wanted to ask you if you can talk about some of the particular people who came to that conference. If you have any funny stories or great memories of the folks who came or have become sort of legends in the LWI community.
I'll mention two people because we could talk about almost everybody. Well, I'll mention three. The first person was a linguist from the University of Chicago named Joe Williams. And he had done a lot of linguistic work on writing, basically. And he'd done a lot of consulting with firms and the judiciary. And I had met him at a 4Cs conference on college composition and communication. So I just wrote him and asked him if he wanted to come and be the keynote speaker for our conference. And he generously said yes, he'd love to come, and gave a great talk, which later was published as the lead article in the first issue of the journal. A really interesting talk. And he became a friend of legal writing for the rest of his career. He was a full professor in the linguistics department at the University of Chicago, but he was always our friend and supporter. So I would mention Joe. I also want to mention Jill Ramsfield, played the piano. Jill's a musician, and she played the piano in the dorm. As it happened, that dorm had a big lounge with a grand piano in it, and Jill would play it at night. And Jill was very interested in status issues because we were suffering. We didn't know from year to year. And she really was the impetus behind the surveys that LWI and Allwood still do to this day. So I wanted to mention Jill. And we had all kinds of characters. Oh, Mary Lawrence. I wanted to mention Mary Lawrence.
And mention Mary and
Marjorie Rombauer.
And Marjorie were there.
Mary taught at Oregon and Marjorie taught at Seattle, or at the University of Washington. And
Marjorie
they were kind
the
of
accordion. I mean, we learned personal things about people that you wouldn't otherwise have known. No, it turned out that Chicago was kind of a hub for legal writing, but Seattle, Northwest with Mary and Marjorie, and then Seattle University / UPS seemed to be breeding grounds for people who wanted to teach legal writing. So it was an intimate situation because there weren't that many of us compared to current conferences, because we were all combined in the same dorms, so there weren't other people like you get in a hotel. And everybody was so glad to have the opportunity to meet other people who shared their passion, which made it a wonderful conference for all of us, and actually motivated us that we would have the energy to do a second one.
It was wonderful. We really became a community just by virtue of being face to face and in those surroundings. And to reiterate what Laurel said, it's hard to imagine today. There was no internet, no email. In order to call someone on the phone was a long distance phone call that cost a lot of money. So you didn't do that casually. You communicated by writing each other letters. That's how you communicated. So to be together and to realize we all shared these same interests and that the field was wide open, there was lots to be done, was just a wonderful thing.
Do you remember any particular presentations or programming? Who was speaking? What kind of programming did you have?
They were very basic.
We had plenary sessions
with our guest speakers. But most of them were things like how to design a writing assignment, how to critique a paper, how to run a small group session with your students, things that each of us were encountering in our day-to-day lives. And there were also, particularly at some of the later conferences, we really made sure that there were small groups where people could share what they were doing in their programs. Groups of 8 or 9, and each person would have an opportunity to spend some time describing their program, what its strengths and weaknesses were. And I found those extremely useful for thinking about what kinds of changes we would make.
What would you say were 3 lasting takeaways from that first biennial?
Well, we realized there was a community out there.
Yeah,
We
that there
weren't
was a
alone. That
community,
was
there were
huge.
other people like us with, like I say, the same interests, in a way that we didn't share interests necessarily with other members of our larger faculties at home. There was this level of enthusiasm. I mean, there was, unlike some other conferences where people came and read papers, we had very many interactive sessions. It was definitely a time of sharing. One of the other things that we actually thought about and wanted people to come away from was a sense of collaboration, getting rid of the hierarchies. We intentionally did not put people's titles on their name tags. So you didn't know if the person was an adjunct or a dean or a first year professor, we were all pretty much instructors back in those days. Yeah, so
The
I
other
don't know
thing I
how.
would add is I think we were realizing that we were a discipline or could become a discipline,
Discipline.
and this was worth doing and taking seriously professionally, that you could make a career out of this.
Laurel, I know that you had a chance to attend the 2024 Biennial, and we enjoyed having you there. For both of you, how do the modern biennials differ from the first biennial? What are some of the elements that, are still infused in every LWI biennial, and what are some of the differences?
Well, I think the biggest one for me is just the size of the conferences and the locations of the conferences. Having it at a small liberal arts school, kind of in the middle of nowhere, really did create kind of a necessity of community in some ways. If you were going to talk to anybody, you were going to talk to legal writing people. And there is to some extent that at the current ones, but it's not as easy to create those communities. At the first couple, by the end of the conference, I knew everybody's name and where they taught. There was no way that was going to happen at the more recent, larger conferences. I got to know a small group. And this is both a positive and a negative. Back in the day, we were all new to doing this. We didn't really know each other. And so we hung out not with people from our own school, but with people from all the other schools that were in attendance. And now when I look around at conferences, I see people tending to sit with people from their own school and not getting to know as many people. And I understand that completely because I do it myself. I'm always attracted to going back and catching up with the people that I know from prior conferences. But the Institute has done a wonderful job welcoming new members and setting out new member dinners. And so I think it's different, but it's the same underlying value system of inclusion, of openness, of people not there to advance their own personal agenda, but to advance the teaching of legal writing. And that's what makes me proud of the organization.
I would agree completely with what Laurel said. I mean, in a way, the Institute is a victim of its own success. I retired some years ago, so I can't even remember the last LWI I went to because I made a promise to myself that retirement means retirement, and I've pretty much kept it, except for these interviews. But the last few I went to, they're so big. They're in hotels, which makes them feel more like any other academic conference. And LWI is huge. I mean, has all these committees and members of these committees and things. And people come to us and say, gee, you were visionary and so forward looking. And I don't feel that way at all. We were just doing the obvious and making it up as we went along. And there weren't committee structures and things like that. It just things had to be done and we did them. But the early conferences were very welcoming and inclusive. And I believe that LWI still makes efforts to make the conferences welcoming and inclusive, especially for new members. And I think that's great. I think that's really important.
I completely agree. Those are definitely things that we try to achieve with every conference to make sure everybody feels welcome. And as you mentioned, create that sense of collaboration and community. But it is harder as we get bigger.
It
So
is
we're
very much
always
harder.
brainstorming ways to do that better. It sounds like you found your people. You discovered this whole group of people across the country who were experiencing the same status issues as you, who had a passion for teaching, and there was this real bond that was formed at this biennial. We are honored to have you and so excited to celebrate our past and all these amazing accomplishments. Thank you all so much for joining us today.